Okay, so now let's move on and talk about reflex control. Okay, so what happens in reflex control is that the response is controlled at a distant integrating center, and it affects the entire system, right? So taking a look at this, we've got our input signal. The integrating center is going to be far away from where that initial stimulus was, okay? And then our response is going to affect the entire body. It's going to be a global response rather than a local response like we saw in local control, okay? On the left here is an example of reflex control. We will talk about it in a couple slides. But let's start by taking a closer look at the steps of a reflex control loop, right? So if we, sorry, going back to the previous slide, if we take this and we expand it, then we get this, okay? So in a reflex control loop, these are the elements that we see, okay? So taking a look at them one by one, we start with the stimulus, which is basically the variable being monitored, okay? Then we have a sensor that's going to be something in the body, right? So it's going to be the cells or something that can tell that the stimulus has changed, okay? Then we're going to have it's what's listed as an input signal here. I really prefer the term afferent pathway because it really is a pathway. It's going to be the pathway that carries that signal to the integrating center, right? So it's going to be like, okay, whatever blood oxygenation is not right, we're going to carry this signal to the integrating center, okay? Here, the integrating center is going to be kind of the main central command center that processes that signal, right? So it's being told like, oh, blood oxygenation or whatever is out of range. It's going to decide what to do on that, decide what to do about that, okay? Then it's going to send that signal through what we call the output signal or the efferent pathway. Again, I prefer the term efferent pathway because it's a pathway, okay? And that's going to carry the command away from the integrating center out to the rest of the body to bring about the response, okay? That signal is going to reach a target, right? So that's going to be an organ or a cell or a tissue that's going to receive the command and carry out the response, right? And then the response is going to be the change that's made, okay? So I know this is a little bit, maybe a little vague, but let's take a look at an example and try to apply what we just looked at to this example, okay? So again, this is the example from the previous slide. What's going to happen is we're going to start with a change in blood pressure, okay? So let's just pretend like our blood pressure has gone down, okay? That's going to be sensed right here, okay? There are these cells in the, well, I don't want to tell you too much because I'm going to ask you to identify the elements here. Okay, so we're going to sense that drop in blood pressure, okay? That signal is going to be sent up to the brain. The brain is going to decide what to do about that. And it's going to send that signal out to the cells at a distant site, okay? And it's going to tell those cells what to do, okay? All right, so here is the next exercise for your worksheet. I'm going to ask you to take a look at this reflex response, okay? And identify all of the elements, okay, of that reflex control pathway in this example, okay? So I do want to say that this example is kind of vague. It doesn't spell everything out, right? There are a lot of little steps here that are left out of this diagram and that have been left out of my description of what's going on here, okay? So you're going to have to make some guesses, make some inferences, okay? As you go ahead and try to identify these elements here, Okay, so go ahead and hit that pause button now. Okay, so I hope you didn't have too much trouble going through and identifying these elements of this reflex control loop right here. But if you did, we're going to go over it in class. We're going to discuss this in class. And hopefully that'll give you a better idea of what is going on here. Okay, so actually, yeah. So that basically wraps up our discussion of local versus reflex control. Okay, so I think I'm not going to go into the details here, but suffice it to say that in the slide shows that I have posted on Canvas, your learning goals are spelled out, okay? And also the vocabulary from this little section of the lecture. All right, so that wraps up our discussion of local versus reflex control. I will see you shortly for a discussion of tonic versus antagonistic control.